Mr. Mas, thank you for being here. And this is some type of follow-up question, and my friend's question. It seems that in this type of process, there's lots of emotions, strong emotions involved. When subjecting such a big decision to the people, where so strong emotions are, it seems unrealistic that any other option available, like the professor was suggesting, would actually succeed if it was handled with also the independence of Catalonia. So my question is has there been any attempt of not subjecting this to a vote, but opening other type of dialogues or communications? Would this be maybe a better solution, handling some other way, not subjecting everything like the actual decision to the people? This is, of course, taking into account what my friend was already saying, that we've seen that in many occasions the democratic solutions aren't the best solutions available. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Let me say that, and believe me when I say we have tried everything, but we haven't tried everything since 2010, as I said before. We have tried everything for a century. At the beginning of the 20th century, Catalan political parties tried to reach agreements with the central state in Madrid. And the consequence was a dictatorship in the 20s, last century. In the 30s, again, Catalan political parties reached agreements with the central institutions in Madrid. And a statute of autonomy of Catalonia was approved at that time, after hard negotiations. And the consequence was, again, another dictatorship, Franco's dictatorship. When democracy was recovered at the end of the 70s, there was another agreement between Catalan political parties and the Spanish institutions. And we recovered a certain level of autonomy. And for a couple of decades, things went quite well. But at the beginning of the current century, things changed. And the central government started to withdraw powers, to recuperate powers that had been transferred before. And that created a negative climate between Madrid and Barcelona. But despite that climate, in 2006, as I said before, I personally negotiated a new statute of autonomy with the Prime Minister of Spain at that time, Mr. Zapatero, representative of the Socialist Party. And we reached an agreement again. And this agreement, transformed in a law, approved by a referendum, was struck down, as I said before, by the Constitutional Court. And after that, I was president at that time. I went to Madrid again, and I put on the table an offer, specific offer, of a fiscal agreement between Catalonia and Spain. And the answer was no. So, for a century, we have tried everything. And when you have, and when you try everything, and you realize that the results are not positive, they are negative, then you have to try another way. And this is what we are doing. But as I said before, this is not something that we invented a couple of years ago. This is not something that some political leaders put on the table because they were they were crossing a very harsh economic crisis. This is the consequence of the reaction of thousands and thousands and thousands of people in Catalonia that have democratic commitments but at the same time, the will to decide the political future of the country. And some of us to aspire to be free. This morning I was in an interview in a radio, in a program of a radio. I remembered one of the most famous speeches of President Kennedy, when he said, "The great revolution in the history of man, past, present, and future, is the revolution of those determined to be free." A lot of people in Catalonia, democratically, peacefully, are determined to be free. Not isolated, free within a general framework called European Union.
Third block.
Third block.
Catalonia in Europe.
I'm working very hard today. Catalonia and the European Union. Let me make a general statement. Maybe it will be a bit amazing. If the European Union succeeded in turning the European Union in a real political federation, then Catalonia probably would not aspire to be Denmark, an independent country. We would aspire to be Massachusetts, a state within a political federation with a similar population, 6 million people in Massachusetts, 7 million people in Catalonia, modern economies, diversified economies, focusing on knowledge, on education, universities, tourism. But if the European Union doesn't succeed in turning the Union in a real political federation, and every country follows its own way, and this is the current situation, unfortunately, then a lot of Catalan people would like to be Denmark. The second statement would be, we know for certain that small countries have to be integrated in superior political unions. But in the 21st century, we also think that our natural umbrella is not a national traditional European state like Spain, but the umbrella of a real European political federation. So our project is to transform the European Union in a political federation. That means strong powers, as Professor Unger said before, strong powers to the central area in the federation. In the case of Europe, Brussels. Strong powers to Brussels. And at the same time, enough tools for the states to develop their own projects. So, in our opinion, in my opinion, in my personal opinion, we should substitute the Spanish umbrella by the European umbrella if the European Union is willing to go to this goal of a real political federation.
So I ask about the relation between the Catalan aspiration for radical devolution or independence and the vision of the European project that accompanies this aspiration. In our first block, we discussed the agenda of an inclusive vanguardism. And we agreed that the implementation of that agenda would require a vast array of institutional experiments. Now, it seems that the European Union is developing according to the following principle. Increasingly, the power to define and to regulate the forms of economic and social organization is centralized in Brussels and in Berlin. And the power to define the educational and social endowments of the citizens is assigned to the local authorities, national or subnational. And under this principle, the European project staggers under the dead hand of technocratic centrism. It seems that we should desire the opposite, that the main vocation of the Union would be to ensure the capabilities of all of its citizens, but then to guarantee to the member states the widest possible latitude for institutional experiment, so that they could pursue projects such as the project of an inclusive vanguardism. Now, the countries that would have the greatest stake in this redirection of the European Union would be the Mediterranean countries and the Eastern countries. And they would have to ally among themselves and ally with the dissident forces within Germany and in France to force this redirection of the Union. So my question is whether in seeking to remain in Europe or to join the European Union as an independent Catalonia, if it must come to independence, you want simply to join the Europe that exists, or whether you want to help shake Europe up in the process of joining it.
Let me say that we don't like Europe like it is right now. We don't like it because we think that it is not strong enough to solve the main problems that have to be solved at a big scale, and it is too strong to intervene in small problems of the day-to-day. This is why we don't agree with the current model of the European construction. In my view, I think that the Federation, the European Federation, should be responsible for foreign affairs, for security and defense, for the most general economic regulations, for the negotiation of agreements with other regions in the world, and also in charge of establishing the levels of solidarity between the different countries of Europe, and nothing else. And all the rest of the powers should be transferred to the states or to the municipalities, because sometimes we forget the basic role of municipalities. And nowadays, a lot of people are going to live to cities. This is not only a European phenomenon right now, it is a world phenomenon. So cities talk to each other, cities negotiate everything with other cities, and they reach agreements with other cities. This is why, in my view, these powers should be as close as the citizens, should be very close to the citizens, because it is important that the citizens have the impression that the problems are solved very close to them, not far, far along them, very close to them. And this is something that Europe has not been able to do in the last few decades. They have created a very inefficient bureaucracy, a lot of red tape, and they have forgotten to deal with the main issues that a political federation should deal. And this is why we don't agree with the current model. We think that it should be transformed. And modestly, because we are very small, we are going to help Europe in order to transform itself and become a real political federation, but without concentrating powers in Brussels, except the general powers that the federation needs to have.
Let's open it up.
President Mas, thank you for being with us and sharing your thoughts on the independence of Catalonia with the Harvard community. You mentioned that independent Catalonia within the European Union would be the best result for the Catalan people. And I wonder, do you also think that it would be the best outcome for the European Union as a whole? And I would like to also ask you to address in particular the concerns of some that the independence of Catalonia would trigger or accelerate similar secessionist movements and processes in other member states, and as a result of which the European Union will fall back into an era where ethnic and linguistic divide dictates the political discourse, economic policies, and eventually national borders. Would the European Union be better off or worse off in this scenario?
Well, this is one of the reasons, not the only reason, but this is one of the reasons for some European countries to be not so enthusiastic about the independence of Catalonia or Scotland or other nations within current European states. It's quite clear. All the European countries have their own realities within their countries, and as I said before, they have a lot of problems on their tables, and they would like not to have an additional problem. But this is the case. I mean, this is the reality. Sometimes you don't like the reality, but you have to deal with it. Sometimes you don't like the reality, but you have to accept it. This is why I said the European policy the European policy right now, referring to independence, is they are reluctant at the beginning and practical in the end. So if they can keep the problem at bay, they do so. But if they can't, because people go ahead, it is the case of our country in Catalonia, they have to accept the reality. And then they have to deal with it. And a clever way to deal with the reality is dialogue, sitting down at the table, talking to each other, negotiate, and reach agreements. And this is what I think that will happen, that is going to happen in the future if Catalonia goes ahead with the creation of a new European state.
Thank you, President Mas, for being with us. So I have a lot of sympathy for your project of releasing Catalans from the Spanish yoke, Spain being kind of as close to like a failed state as you get in Europe, possibly. But I do have the question that Professor Unger was alluding to. So, how is the danger that this would repeat eventually with within the European framework. So you'll be, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, you'll be complaining about Brussels rather than Madrid here, and the prima facie evidence is there, right? Like, so you yourself alluded to it, right? Like, so the European Union is in a period of deep crisis, of kind of the democratic deficits of the European Union have been highlighted, and at the same time there's a strong core that the President of the Commission, Juncker, was alluding to a few days ago about having more fiscal power, which is something that you mentioned a few times, centralized in Brussels, possibly in Berlin as well. So is there no, are you underestimating the uncertainty of sort of being such a keen European at the time where Europe is in crisis, and your argument of being able to shape Europe seems sort of difficult to stomach, right? Like, 'cause obviously Catalonia will be much smaller in principle in terms of GDP population. It will no longer be 90% of the GDP of Europe, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Well, if the question is to change Madrid by Brussels has any interest for us, the answer is I don't know offhand. But we know what happens in Madrid regarding Catalonia. This is something that we know for certain. We don't know what would happen with Brussels. As I said before, they have created a public administration with a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of red tape, a lot of obstacles from the administrative point of view, and so on. But what we know for certain is that it is very difficult to make the Spanish state understand what the Catalan reality is. This is very difficult. And believe me if I say that we have tried everything, as I said before. We don't know what would happen with Brussels, believe me. But it is a risk. It is a risk. It is a risk. There is always a risk. In all countries, there is always a natural tendency to see the concentration of power in a specific city as a negative point. This is something that happens in the United States in relationship with Washington. It also happens in Germany, a very decentralized country, a federal country, regarding Berlin. It happens everywhere. It also happens in the United Kingdom, referring to London. But in my view, when I analyze the best countries in the world, I see, generally speaking, small European countries. What does a very good country mean? A country with a very positive healthcare system, with a smart educational system, with a strong welfare state, with an open economy, and a country capable to create jobs with fair salaries. And if you make the list of these countries in the world, you will find Denmark, Austria, Switzerland, Finland, Norway, Sweden, Belgium. So, similar countries to Catalonia. They are not big, they are not powerful, they don't have mighty powers. But if you live in one of these countries, you know for certain that you are living in the best countries in the world. And this is our dream.
So, because we're really behind schedule, we're going to accept one last question, and then we're going to have the reception at Harkness South. So, if you don't know the place, as you get out of the building, you turn to your left, and it's that building on the upper floor.
Mr. President, it was a pleasure to listen to you, and I must say that I like Catalonia, I like Gaudi, I like Daniel Brühl, and I like Xavi. And I like you now.
Thank you.
Maybe you are closest to last one. A question is, you came out with very clear idea of future of European Union. And I think your idea is closer to France and Germany, the big countries, than the idea of small countries you mentioned. Mm-hmm. That's the first. And the second is, with coming out with such a clear idea of future of European Union, you will have friends, which are this big, but you will also have a lot of enemies, mm-hmm. which are against this concept of European Union. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how I appreciate being very open, but how you fit within the idea that you are supporting strategy of big players in European Union and mentioning mid-sized countries within the same community?
Mm-hmm. In my opinion, in my view, the Germans really would like a description of Europe as I did. But I'm not so convinced that France would like the same. When I analyze the policies that the majority of the European countries follow right now, they are selfish. They don't work for the integration of Europe. They prefer to develop their national projects, and they don't know how to deal with the big challenges of humanity and Europe, specifically speaking. So in this sense, I'm disappointed. I'm frankly disappointed. But you know, we lost our state 3 centuries ago. We have always been pro-European because we have considered Europe our home, our homeland, even our homeland. And we are going to continue making efforts in order to convince European people that the right model would be a real political federation in Europe. Because we think that in the global world, we need a powerful voice, we need influence, and we need to be a relevant political body in the world. And if we don't succeed in reaching this political integration, we will be a lot of countries with a lot of parliaments, with a lot of regional or national governments, but without a general project for all of us. This is why we are fighting in order to convince these other Europeans, our neighbors, to create a real political federation. But I fully accept that this is not the general idea in Europe. A lot of people in politics in Europe don't like to go to a real political federation. In our opinion, this is a great mistake.
Thank you all.
So, President Mas, Professor Unger, thank you very much for your time here with us. We hope to be able to have a more informal conversation with you both at Harkness South. Again, as you get out of the building, you turn your left, follow the crowds. Most of our HLS students here will be able to lead you there. Thank you very much for coming.